Well, let me start by paying a compliment to our chairman. I think that he's handled these hearings in a very gracious way. He's given us a great deal of time and leeway, and whatever our opinions might be about the suitability of the nominee, and obviously that's as yet undetermined for many. I think we can agree that the chairman has done a thoughtful and good job, and I appreciate the way in which this has been managed. Judge Gorsuch, this is probably the last time you will pay attention to me.
Don't count on that, Senator.
I'm not likely to appear before the court unless things should change fairly dramatically. So there are just a few things that
that would be interesting. You know, I've had Senator Lee in my courtroom.
Yeah, and I've argued in the Supreme Court, but some time ago. I wanted to tell a story to you, to follow up a little bit on our conversation where I was trying to draw an analogy between anti-competitive controlling economic power and anti-competitive controlling political power. I was elected to the Senate in 2006. I was sworn in 2007. For the first 3 years that I was here, 2007, 2008, and 2009, there was constant Republican activity on climate change in the Senate. During that period, the Republican candidate for president even had a robust climate change platform. And there were probably 4 or 5 separate bills that had Republican co-sponsors. I was on the Environment and Public Works Committee, where Senator Warner, John Warner of Virginia, a Republican, had a bill. Senator Susan Collins had a bill with Senator Cantwell. Senator Alexander had a bill. I think Senator Graham was even working on one. There were a considerable number of them. We didn't have agreement on that issue yet, but there was activity. People were talking. The legislative process was going forward. The Citizens United decision was decided in January of 2010. The fossil fuel industry asked for that decision to be rendered, expected it to be rendered, and moved incredibly rapidly to take advantage of its new opportunities. And from that moment forward, there has not been a single comprehensive piece of legislation with a Republican co-sponsor related to carbon dioxide emissions. That industry is defending, according to the International Monetary Fund, a $700 billion a year subsidy. So the amount of weight they can throw behind trying to stop any effort to interfere with their current status quo goes beyond almost any reasonable number to spend in politics. So just bear that in mind as you go forward, that, in my view, Citizens United did not expand debate in the public sphere, particularly on that issue. It actually allowed powerful special interests to squash public debate, and I think the conduct of the Senate proves that point. So take that for what it's worth, but I think if you look at it at some point, you'll find that what I'm saying is accurate. The second thing that I wanted to touch on is the jury. A great number of the decisions that I listed in that 16-0 corporate versus human 5-4 array that the Supreme Court has decided recently had the effect of limiting access to a jury. Did it with raising pleading standards, did it with limiting class actions, did it with encouraging mandatory arbitration. To me, the civil jury matters quite a lot. To the founders, it was one of the casus belli of the revolution. They took it terribly seriously. Hamilton described it as one of the absolute pinnacles of what we needed. Adams described the popular vote and the jury as the heart and lungs of liberty. So this was a big deal. De Tocqueville described the civil jury as a political institution. He meant that in the best possible way. It was part of our polis, part of the way in which the public had the chance to participate in making decisions. He called it part of the sovereignty of the people. Blackstone, who was probably the single jurist who most educated the founding generation, said that the civil jury is what prevents the encroachment of the more powerful and wealthy citizens. So you have a Constitution, a great deal of which is dedicated to protecting the individual from the power of government and the power of the state, and to dividing up the power of government and the state so it does not unify and crush individual behavior or dreams or wishes. This institution is the one that was designed to protect the individual against other more powerful and wealthy citizens. And in this world, our most powerful and wealthy citizens are these ginormous corporations, ones that collectively in the fossil fuel industry enjoy that $700 billion per year subsidy. So I would urge that as you consider this array of cases that chips and chips and chips and chips away at the civil jury access that regular Americans have, particularly where it involves big corporations, because they're the ones who can force mandatory arbitration on people, for instance. They're the ones who tend to be the victims of class action suits, for instance. That you bear that in mind. Are you sensitive to that so-called political institution of the civil jury, and do you agree with me that it has a role in defending the little guy against the more powerful and wealthy citizens?
Senator, I've talked a lot about the Seventh Amendment over the last 3 days. Quite a lot. I'm a believer in the civil jury system. And I don't know whether it's the very bulwark of liberty or the palladium of liberty.
You've got the Hamilton quote. Good for you.
All right?
Yep.
They debated that.
Yep.
Which one it was.
Yep.
But I'm a big believer in it. I spent a lot of time in the trial trenches of the law. I saw the value of the jury system. And yes, Senator, I'm a big believer in civil juries. And I think my record proves it.
Stick with it, because it's going away unless the judiciary breathes a little bit of life into it. And at the moment, I think the Supreme Court is leaning the opposite way. The last thing I want to ask you has to do with an email that you sent back in some time ago, but I think you'll remember it. Back in February of 2006, the scene was Attorney General Gonzalez's testimony to this committee with respect to the terrorist surveillance program.
Okay.
It was the testimony that led to the Department of Justice Inspector General investigation. And I have the declassified version of it here, which found that the Attorney General's testimony was incomplete and confusing, and that it was confusing, inaccurate, and had the effect of misleading those who were not knowledgeable about the program, which was obviously all of us, because it was a classified program and we had not been read into it. On this day, when the Attorney General of the United States was giving misleading, confusing, and inaccurate testimony to this committee, you emailed back to Kyle Sampson and William Maschella, "I think the AG is doing a really nice job today. He's running circles around the committee members." Now, running circles around the committee members worries me a little bit in the context of testimony that proved to be incomplete, misleading, inaccurate, and was criticized as such by the Inspector General of the Department of Justice. Do you recall when you sent that memo what you knew about that testimony, and when it was that you came to realize that Attorney General Gonzalez's testimony was inaccurate and misleading to this Senate committee?
Senator, someone shared that email with me this morning, and I looked at it. I don't have an independent recollection of it, sitting here 11 years later, whatever it is. And to my knowledge, I did not have any classified information at that time.
I gather that you did help him prepare that testimony.
Senator, I did, as a speechwriter, work from public materials.
As we know, Director Comey and others subsequently testified to all of the drama that surrounded that, which was the subject of why, that was the reason that this was misleading and inaccurate. There was the confrontation in the Attorney General's hospital room. There was the mad dash running up the stairs to try to beat White House counsel to the Attorney General's bedside. I think either Mullen or Comey testified it was the only time they'd ever used their sirens to try to get someplace fast, and it had kind of creepy third world overtones of people, you know, rushing to get to the bedside of the stricken Attorney General before White House counsel could do mischievous things. So it was very significant when it ultimately came out. Do you recall what you knew that day or at the time that you were preparing the Attorney General's testimony?
That's a fair
Had those events taken place, and were you aware of them? Must have been the talk of the department if they'd happened.
Senator, fair question. And to my recollection sitting here, I found out about those things when everybody else did. I
In
was
the famous Schumer-Comey hearing.
whenever it came out publicly, Senator, I wasn't.
You weren't read into it, and you hadn't heard about the excitement in Attorney General Ashcroft's hospital room.
That's my recollection, Senator.
Okay. Very well. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're going to love hearing this, Mr. Chairman. I yield back my time.